which is so different than like, violin or piano that has hundreds of years of people being like, you know what works? This.
Yeah.
So, I think the banjo, I hope, will get there, but it's a complicated thing because the instrument is just so much less linear. It's really good at being a banjo and pretty bad at other things.
Hello, banjo people. This is your fellow banjo person, Keith Billick, here with the Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast. Thank you all for joining me. You're all very special to me, but I have to admit, I do have a favorite listener right now, and his name is Leonard Leedy. And the reason Leonard Leedy is so special to me right now is because he chose to be a supporter of the podcast. He went to patreon.com/banjopodcast and donated money to keep this whole thing running. And I really do appreciate his support. You can support the podcast too by going to that Patreon page. And if you don't care to do that, that's fine too. I still am really happy that you're listening. And also for those of you who are just spreading the word about the podcast, that's some of the best promotion I can possibly get. And I really thank you for that. I also appreciate all of you who have taken the time to email me your thoughts and suggestions and comments about the podcast. Most of them have been, I'll just go ahead and say all of them have been pretty positive about the podcast. But even if you have a complaint, if you think something is really awful, feel free to let me know. I'm a banjo player. I have thick skin. I can take that kind of thing. It's all good. Whatever your thoughts are on the podcast, you can express those to me using the email address pickyfingersbanjopodcast@gmail.com, and I look forward to hearing from you that way. Today's guest on the podcast is a guy named Wes Corbett, and Wes is a really amazing dude, a really amazing banjo player. He is, in my mind, really advancing and redefining what it means to be a modern banjo player. And what I mean by that is he just tends to have a very broad range of skills on the banjo that he's worked really hard to cultivate, and also having a lot of outside influences, even apart from what we would consider the banjo universe, and manages to just filter those all through his banjo and his music, and it really comes out as a very impressive display of skills and musicianship. So I'm really excited to have you hear what he's all about and hear some of his music. Wes gained notoriety by playing with a band called Joy Kills Sorrow, and we actually didn't end up discussing that band very much on this podcast, so I at least wanted to point that out, that he was part of that band and they had a few really great recordings. Now he plays with the Molly Tuttle Band. Molly is an award-winning guitar player, so that's a really impressive group to see him with as well. And also, he has a project with a hammered dulcimer player named Simon Chrisman, and you'll get to hear him talk quite a bit about his relationship with Simon and the music that they're doing. Something that impressed me talking to Wes is how seriously he takes all aspects of his craft. He's obviously very serious about playing. He's literally been working at it his entire life, as you'll hear him talking about. He's really serious about the sound that he gets out of his banjo. He's really serious about producing records. He's really serious about teaching. He taught at the Berklee College of Music for several years. So there's a focus with him that I think really comes out in his playing. So I had a great time chatting with him about all aspects. I feel like I could have picked his brain for quite a bit longer about his different influences and his approach to all of this musical stuff that is going on in his head. There is something else about this podcast that I'm noticing while editing it that I hesitate to point out, but I'll just go ahead and come clean with it. I'm really into what Wes is talking about, but you know who I'm not into? It's me. There just seem to be certain points in the interview where I come across as having not too much enthusiasm or energy, and I just don't want people to take that the wrong way as if I'm disinterested in what Wes was saying. I'm actually a big fan of his playing, so nothing could be further from the truth. So I'm going to chalk it up to this was at banjo camp, and maybe I was tired or something like that. So that's my excuse. I hope it doesn't bother you too much. And the last thing to mention here before we get started, I'm actually going to let you behind the scenes here of the Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast. When I'm setting up for these interviews with these players, there's always a process of getting the microphone set up, getting the levels checked, getting the recording equipment started, all that kind of stuff. And then as soon as I'm ready, I give some sort of signal like, okay, we're rolling, we're starting now. With this, I started the recorder as I was setting up the microphones, and you can hear Wes discussed the proper microphone placement for his banjo, and I just thought it was interesting, or at least I like hearing that kind of stuff from banjo players. So I included sort of the pre-interview footage that I have. You'll hear me placing the microphone. It's not necessarily the most interesting thing to listen to if you're not into that, but I am, so here you go. Enjoy the podcast with Wes Corbett.
Usually this side of the banjo sounds better. I don't know how geeky you want to get about this, but...
If you know that, then I will go ahead.
Yeah,
like
so...
between the bridge and the tailpiece?
Or even kind of more... So like a lot of the time it's here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's where I usually go for.
But this banjo likes something a little higher, but it definitely should be parallel with the head is one thing that Cinco is always like... Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, you hear that? Like popped into...
Yep.
Much more...
Wow, yeah. That's great.
So much more like prismatic.
And that's unique to your banjo you've found? Or
This instrument, yeah, really likes to be mic'd up there, which is kind of funny. I mean, and it's funny because like basically my hand is like...
It doesn't make sense.
In between, but it really doesn't matter. Yeah. Yeah, cool. Okay.
Ready?
Yeah.
Cool. We're rolling. Hey, Wes, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
I'm very good. So I don't know you personally too well, but it's nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Tell me where you're from and how you got into the banjo.
Yeah, so I'm originally from a little island across the water from Seattle called Bainbridge Island.
Okay.
And I was super privileged and lucky enough that when my parents realized that I was musical, they started me on classical piano when I was 2.5.
They realized you were musical at age of 2.
My mom always joked and said that I came out of the womb humming.
Wow.
And my grandfather on my mom's side was a conductor and classical pianist and trumpet player. And so I think they also helped out my folks in those early years.
You had a lot of embryonic vibrations happening
totally.
From outside.
Well, my mom was a professional modern dancer too, so there was a lot of music going on.
A lot of arts.
A lot of arts,
influenced.
yeah. And my dad was a professional potter. So
yeah, that's
artsy
incredible.
family.
So they started you on classical piano, you said?
Yeah, Suzuki classical piano.
Did you get pretty serious about that? Stick with it?
I stuck with it like only because my mom, which I'm so thankful for, just like made me stick with it until I heard the banjo, and then she lost. That's the oldest story in the book, right? the someday you'll thank me for making you take piano lessons. No, it's totally true. Yeah,
you're living proof.
So many arguments, now that I just think back and I'm like, wow, what a jerk I was being.
Yeah, what a gift.
Yeah.
So what age was that you switched to banjo?
I switched to banjo after I heard Bela Fleck when I was 14, and I pretty much went cold turkey on the piano.
Was that Fleck tones?
The first record that I heard was Double Time, the duet record.
Trishka?
No, it's the one that's like a bunch of different duets with different people.
Like O'Connor and Schatz.
Yeah, and Tony Rice and Hartford. Yeah, it's cool. It's a cool record. I used to I almost failed geometry because I would wear a hoodie in class and then feed
your headphones
feed my headphones up underneath the hoodie. And
how did a 14-year-old discover Bela Fleck duet?
Yeah. So my folks had a pretty big record collection that my older brother, who's 4.5 years older than me, kind of got into listening to. And he found the original David Grisman Quintet record. And then I was telling one of his friends' dads about it, and that dad burned a bunch of records, burned a bunch of CDs for Quinn and I to listen to, and one of them was Double Time, which now I know is a bad thing. listening
to burn CDs?
listening to burn records. But, at the time, I was just so psyched.
I'm sure that somehow or another, Bela Fleck has gotten some of your dollars because of him burning you that CD. So
totally, yeah.
It ended up all right.
But and then so I started on lessons in Seattle with a guy named Dave Keenan, who is kind of one of the fixtures of the acoustic scene out there. He plays, let's see, banjo, guitar, like electric and acoustic, mandolin and fiddle, and writes a lot. He also like edits classical scores for video game music. He's just like a really great musician and was an awesome first teacher. He's an interesting banjo player because he doesn't necessarily play Scruggs style like note for note, but he like his version of the banjo is just so cool. It's like so open, and I think I kind of started out with that from the get-go, with this idea that like it doesn't have to be this set in stone
constrained
thing. Yeah. And that's kind of like, I think, such a great gift a teacher can give a student,
Yeah, is the open mind.
Yeah.
So what did he that being said, was he still starting you off with the roll patterns and all of that?
Oh,
business?
yeah. No, I mean, I got a really solid foundation in like roll-based banjo playing, for sure. It wasn't necessarily like note-for-note Scruggs style, He's just not the kind of person, because he plays so many other instruments, too, and he kind of plays them all like himself.
Yeah.
It was awesome. The more I think back on that, I think I was just really lucky to have such excellent teachers.
Still influencing you, probably.
Yeah,
the
we're
mindset.
friends. We always hang out. He comes and visits me in Nashville sometimes.
Cool. So you were pretty consumed by it. Did you practice quite a bit in those days?
A ton. Yeah, so much. I mean, I probably 3 or 4 hours a day. Yeah, every day. There was this poor neighbor that I just probably like tortured.
On the island.
On the island, yeah, at my mom's house. Yeah, just playing along with records and stuff, and
I have a few college roommates who could start a support group for that poor neighbor of yours.
Yeah,
for sure,
totally. But yeah, I also on my dad's side, my dad's oldest brother Fred is also a banjo player. He was actually
he lived in the area.
He lived in Oregon. Yeah, he lived like in Southern Oregon. He was the guitar player and tenor singer for this like folk revival band called the Brandywine Singers.
Okay.
That basically they were doing really, really well, and then the Beatles played on Ed Sullivan, and their careers tanked like almost overnight. But they were like selling out college auditoriums. They were doing really, really well. But Fred is a really great banjo player and bass player and guitar player and singer. So
whenever you'd run into him,
yeah, he would show me some stuff, and yeah.
So who were your other influences? Obviously, you probably stuck with Bela a bit. Did you dive deep into the bluegrass guys?
Eventually, yeah. I mean, at first, coming from not being steeped in the bluegrass world at all. I mean, the music that I really grew up listening to was like classical music, and then like the Beatles, James Taylor and Jackson Brown, like that's what
your parents were.
Yeah,
into.
that's like what was playing around the house, So like at first, especially bluegrass vocals was really jarring for me. I was just like, why are they singing like that? But now I love it. I absolutely love it. Yeah. But it took me a while. I think you have that moment when or at least for me, when I realized like, wait, if I want to sound like Bela or Noam or Jens or any of the like really amazing modern banjo players, Tony Trischka, I have to be a really good Scruggs style player. Like those two things are inseparable.
Would you tell people that these days, even if they are convinced that they never want to be in a bluegrass band?
Yes.
And they hate that music, but they just want to play like Trischka, you would still recommend that they
certainly if they want to play like Trischka.
Yeah, maybe that's a bad example. Maybe more Jens or
or Noam or I mean, it's I think of it as like the classical technique of three-finger banjo. There's just something about like the tone production and timing aspect of it you just don't get anywhere else. Like you can't put your right hand through its paces any other way.
Yeah, it's almost like the grammar, where anything you're saying doesn't make as much sense if you don't have a grammar system.
Right.
That's tying it all together.
Yeah, I think of it as like things sound anemic.
Yeah, there's something not there that should be. Mm-hmm. So what happened then? When did you start playing with people? When did you start developing your own style? And what kind of things did you do to explore that?
I actually wrote a tune. So, the first tune I learned was Cripple Creek from Dave. And I came back a week later having having it pretty well down. It's like I'd played a lot of music, so practicing that for a week, I could play it pretty well.
It's no different than your piano.
Yeah,
practice.
Well, I mean, it's like the mechanics of it were different, obviously at first, but I think I had the tools to understand how to practice well.
That's important. Yeah.
And so I came back and I had learned Cripple Creek and could play it fairly competently. And had also written a tune. I wish I could remember what the tune was, but I had written a tune. I think I was just so excited about the freedom of the banjo coming from the classical world.
Interesting.
Where I can just write a tune on this. I can do whatever I want, it was so freeing.
Were you aware of improvisation, or was that something that you knew that was out there?
Yeah, but I didn't know how to improvise at all. And it's funny because now, I knew a little bit of music theory on piano, but
sure.
When I think music theory in my head, it's all banjo. It's not piano. I think most people assume that if I'm thinking scales and chords and stuff, it's all piano in my head. It's totally not, because I learned to improvise on the banjo. So it's all banjo, for better or worse.
I mean, it's all the same notes, right?
Yeah.
They're still there. It still works. So what was the next thing that happened? Somehow you ended up... Did you go to school out east? I know you ended up out in the Boston area.
Right. Well, so the first thing that happened was that I met Simon Chrisman, who is this just epic hammered dulcimer player. He transcends that instrument. And he's 6 years older than me, so but he grew up on Bainbridge Island.
No kidding.
And so he was 20 when I was 14.
Right.
And I went and saw Bill Frisell and Danny Barnes, that band, that iteration of the Bill Frisell band, play on Bainbridge. And Simon opened for them solo. Yeah,
okay.
just solo on the dulcimer. And then I ran into him at this place called the Veggie House, which is a vegetarian Vietnamese restaurant. And he gave me his business card, which is so funny now, thinking back on Simon even having business cards.
It doesn't seem to fit his character.
No. I mean, but and then we got together and he was way better than I was when I first started.
This is still
playing.
When you're 14, 15?
This is when I was 14. I'd been playing banjo for 6 months or something, and then I met Simon, and he got together with me, and I think he was just psyched to have somebody to play with, who was a young person, and so we kind of started playing more and more together. We would play 3 or 4 days a week for an hour or two.
Wow.
And kind of created this whole language together before we knew that 5-string banjo and hammered dulcimer was a really weird thing.
You shouldn't be able to do that.
That we shouldn't, yeah, totally. And that continues to this day. We actually just released a duo record.
I own that, and I was going to bring it up. Now would be a good time, I guess.
Sure.
That's some... It's really funny the way that you explain this, because that's what I was going to say, is that the intricacies of some of the playing, I can't tell if it's improvised or not. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, part of the beauty of it, is that these things seem to happen, just little timing changes and arrangements that seem perfect enough that they must be arranged. But if all of it was truly arranged, then it would have taken forever for you guys to actually figure all that out. And the only explanation left is that you guys have spent so much time.
We've spent so much time. I think working up that kind of material with anyone else, almost anyone else, would have taken twice as long easily. But we kind of have this like mind meld thing going on. So yeah, it's. I think there are, just in the same way that like, I don't know, there's maybe just a handful of people like in romantic relationships that you form like a really, really tight bond with in your life, or maybe just one person. I don't know. I think there's only a few of those people musically too, and Simon is definitely one of them.
That's really interesting. So just to put a bow on that, what's that new recording called? I can't remember.
It's just self-titled. It's called Simon Chrisman and Wes Corbett.
Okay. Yeah, and that just came out a week or two ago. We're talking right now in early June. I'm not sure when people will be listening to this, but
sure.
But it's out there, and it's a hammer dulcimer and banjo duet, and it's really fascinating stuff. So yeah, keep going. So who did you end up finding to play with?
Well, so I hung with Simon for a couple of years and then went to Wintergrass, which was kind of my hometown festival, which, again, I'm super lucky because that's an amazing festival. Yep. I mean, like their lineup is really diverse, like they would hire like killing trad bluegrass bands and then a bunch of other things I'd never heard of. And there, when I was jamming, I met Jake Jolliffe, Alex Hargraves. I think you know what it was is that this band called Pupville was playing there one year, which is sort of basically a kids band that David Grisman put together for his son Sam to play bass in. And that was Sam Grisman, Jake Jolliffe, Frankie Nagel, who was a really amazing banjo player and singer. I haven't really heard from her in a long time. Okay. Alex Hargraves on fiddle, and this guy named Ian Fleming from Montana on guitar, who is an engineer somewhere now.
But a bunch of hot shots.
Yeah, everybody was so good. Yeah. And I met all those guys, and I was a little older than them. I was like a few years, I'm 2 years older than Jake. But I kind of, kicked around with them that Wintergrass and jammed a bunch in one of the stairwells.
Yeah.
And that kind of kicked the whole thing off, I mean, the bluegrass scene or acoustic scene, whatever you want to call it, is I think for every generation a pretty close-knit thing, at least regionally, because like through them I met like Sarah Jarose and Dominic Leslie and all kinds of other great pickers.
Yeah, there's a web.
And it all kind of came from going to festivals together when we were kids, and like our parents would just kind of let us do whatever.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Like my dad would just drop me off at Wintergrass.
Yeah, that's almost incredible to even think about at this point, but
right.
Good thing he did.
Yeah. So, and then I graduated from high school and decided that I would try to go to college for banjo. I ended up going to Cal Arts in Valencia for a year as a banjo player, but they didn't have a banjo program. And it's an amazing school, facilities, teachers, everything, but it just felt like I kind of already knew what I wanted to be and where I wanted to be. And that school, it was really expensive, and like none of my high school picking buddies were anywhere near there. And
kind of a lonely situation.
Yeah, it kind of was a weird situation. So I ended up leaving, and I moved home for like 9 months and worked the only real job I've ever had, which was working in a bakery. And then saved up money, moved to Boston kind of on a whim, actually. Basically, I had met Chris Eldridge and Chris Pandolfi, and they tipped me off that they were moving to Nashville to start the String Dusters. And basically, so like I moved maybe a month after Pandolfi left Boston.
Having just graduated from Berklee.
Yeah. And he had been like, teaching and gigging a lot. So I like actually moved at 19, I think, with gigs on the books to Boston.
Basically filling in for him.
Yeah.
Or not filling in, but picking
right, kind of just picking up
behind.
Yeah, like picking up the the hole in the scene there that he had been filling, which is a really lucky thing.
Yeah.
So it was so funny actually. I played some like, what was it? Some like private party the first week that I moved there. And it was like out on the Cape, and it was like there's lobster everywhere, and like some super expensive private party, and we each got paid like $700 or $800.
Wow. Yeah.
And I was like, I just need to get like one or two of these a month, and I'll be set. I had no idea what I was doing. Like, I didn't, of course, didn't get another gig like that for like 2 years.
Take them when you can.
Right, but yeah. At that point, I had met Tristan and Tashina Claridge.
Okay.
And we had started this band called the Bee Eaters with Simon. And it's essentially
how did Simon get out there too?
The whole band moved out to Boston eventually. Kind of the scene was exploding because Berklee had started allowing banjo and mandolin players to come, and NEC had started accepting some people too. Sarah Jarosz went to NEC. Let's see, who else? A bunch of other people.
Yeah,
but like Bridget Carney. Basically like
there's just a whole flock of acoustic players.
Right. And so it sort of came to this apex where it was like almost every single music friend I'd ever made was living in Boston, which was an incredible thing. And during that time, this band called the Bee Eaters was rehearsing like crazy. We had made one record that we had rehearsed for quite a bit that Daryl Anger produced and engineered. Yeah. And that one's just self-titled. Okay. They might be a little hard to find, these records. And then another one that was the last thing I did with the band in 2010 called Oddfellows Road that I'm still to this day like really proud of. That was the first time I met this really amazing engineer named Dave Cinco too. He engineered that record.
Yeah, and he of course is. Why don't you give his brief credentials?
Sure. So he has been in the audio engineering world since the like late 80s, early 90s. He cut his teeth working pop country stuff in Nashville, and kind of quickly rose to being one of the people that the sort of greater bluegrass and acoustic scene realized that he just has this like sensitivity to what's going on musically and from an engineering side that's kind of unparalleled. Like working with him is like having another band member.
Wow.
And he actually engineered the record that Simon and I just made too.
Okay.
And mixed it and mastered it.
Yeah.
And I've had the luck of producing a couple records and the latest one with Front Country, we mixed that record together.
Okay. That's an incredible record, too.
Oh, thanks.
I remember Jeremy Darrow, the bass player for Front Country, I think it was at Midwest Banjo Camp a couple years ago, was coming to me just beaming about this new recording that they were making and had really great things to say about you. It seemed like you made a big difference for them. That
was such a fun session. It was 10 days in a really beautiful studio in Oakland, and kind of like all the gear you could ever want or need.
Was that your first stab at producing?
Yeah, producing a record start to finish. And I guess the thing that's sort of complicated about it is like I had been really involved in Bee Eaters records, in terms of like arranging things. I'm not saying I arranged everything myself, but like I wrote a lot of that material and like we arranged it all as a band. So like I've been a lot more than just like a gun for hire in my typical career, you know?
So it was a natural thing to happen.
Yeah. And like the last, we haven't even talked about Joy Kill Sorrow yet, I guess. The last record that we made with Joy Kill Sorrow was self-produced. And I think it's by far our best.
Okay.
And I really started to pay attention to like signal chains on things and how things are, how it's all going in and like what's affecting people's performances. And I really started to pay attention to that during that session.
So what, if you have a way of encapsulating that in any effective way, so let's take the Front Country project. What were the types of things that you contributed to that you think made it a successful project?
Well, for one thing, it's like I just try to pick musicians that I think are really great to work with.
That does
but I had some arrangement ideas on some things. Maybe not like on some things that they sent me, some demos they sent me. It was basically like, cool, that sounds great. You know what I mean? And then some things that I kind of helped them deconstruct and put back together. And I think that for me, working with different producers, you know, over the course of my career so far, the thing that's really stuck with me, pros and cons of somebody as a producer that I like working with, is somebody who doesn't talk if they don't have something to say.
They're not trying to feel like they need to earn their
paycheck.
Or
like or that they're bringing their ego into putting their sort of sound stamp on a record at the cost of where the music maybe should actually go.
Okay.
And so for me, it was kind of just like, you know what? I just want to help people make records that sound good. Like I want to help people get along. I want to help tones happen in like a really great way. We spent a whole day on tones with Front Country, the whole first day. And you know, honestly, I think that in the acoustic world, at least, that's the best possible use of your time in the studio. Because like if you walk into the control room and are listening back to something and the stereo image is already functioning, right? As in like there aren't conflicts between instruments that don't exist acoustically.
Yeah.
You're in a really good place.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're like, oh, we'll fix it in mix. I hate that. I hate that staying. Because like all you're doing is causing problems that you're just going to be diving down the endless digital rabbit hole through mixing and mastering. Just like get it right from the get-go.
Right. Yep.
And like not only will playback in the control room sound better, but everybody's headphones sound amazing.
Yeah.
You know, like which means that people make
more inspiring to listen to. And
yeah.
It's a cumulative.
It's
effect.
a very cyclical thing. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's a huge portion of it is like trying to factor my own ego out of it as much as possible. And yeah, staying out of the way unless you need to be there.
Yeah. Being as objective as possible and honest at the same time.
Sure.
So we haven't actually talked a whole lot about your actual playing.
Sure.
What types of things did you work on that, I mean, by the time you're working on the Beat Eaters and everything, you were pretty established in terms of how you play.
Yeah.
And what types of things did you work on to get there? What did you consider your influences? And
Sure. I mean, I listened to a ton of Bela and definitely a lot of like young Noam. And then it also kind of started working my way backwards towards trad banjo playing by that point. You know, and I think that the like classical piano thing that influence can't really be undone. So there's so much of the Beat Eaters music that's almost like chamber music, really, that, you know, is the way I'm playing banjo is very piano-y, honestly. But in terms of like how I got there, I mean, I was trying to figure out ways both kind of quarterly and scalarly to map the instrument. Because there really weren't resources for that yet. I mean, there still aren't a whole lot of them, but there's way more now than there were when I was 21.
Yeah.
Just in terms of like understanding how to navigate the fingerboard in a bunch of different keys and like play passages, like melodic passages that scale, you know, almost 2 octaves or something like that you can't use open strings to do.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and it was all stuff that I was just kind of flying by the seat of my pants. Like, I guess I'll do it like this, you know? And it's a funny thing because there's no established pedagogy for any of it, which is so different than like, you know, violin or piano that has hundreds of years of people being like, you know what works? This.
Yeah.
So I think the banjo, I hope, will get there, but it's a complicated thing because the instrument is just so much less linear as well. It's really good at being a banjo and pretty bad at other things.
Yeah, the strings are at weird intervals.
Right.
And
I think
the range of the whole thing is fairly compact compared to most
Right.
other instruments. And
Right.
Yeah, it's...
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, but that asymmetry is sort of what makes it so cool at the same time.
Right, you're hearing the limitations, and that's the character of it.
Right.
So what is this banjo that you're playing? This is a really cool-looking instrument.
I am playing a Hawthorne top tension, which is basically a copy of an RB7.
Right.
It has
so is this a maple?
Yeah, it's all
instrument?
maple. Has like a tiny bit of a radius on it. I forget what actual. We're getting real banjo nerdy here, but and then let's see. It has a Huber ring. I actually forget what kind of rim it has in it. What a Remo head. I've been digging the Deering Smile bridge on this banjo. It definitely opened some stuff up.
You noticed a difference with that?
I did.
So you have you said a Huber ring and some sort of rim. Who is Hawthorne? Is he just the one who made the neck, and did you piece this thing together?
No, they made this instrument for me. They're the only folks who are manufacturing top tension parts in the States right now.
Wow.
And yeah, so they make really great stuff. Yeah, I've had this for maybe a little over a year now, and I've played it like pretty much exclusively since.
Okay.
There's something really special that top tensions can do in terms of sustain. I think is really what I mean, it's like there's a tonal difference too. Like
more sustain, you think?
Yeah, more sustain, and typically like more of kind of like a pop in the mid and low end of what banjos produce. Like, from a frequency response spectrum, we're talking like 1 and 200 is sort of behind every single note you play.
Yep.
It's kind of like if you like that sound, like if you hit your fist into your hand.
It's amazing that you say that, because I always described it as being the knock.
Mm-hmm.
I look for the knock. You want to. It's the frequency that taps your chest when the back of the resonator
totally
is leaning against your body.
Sure.
And that's a good sign when it has that.
Yeah.
What are your other like live preferences? It seems like you're into microphones and things, and so am I. So talk about what you use and what you do for a live setup.
Yeah, so I mean, in the last couple of years, I guess we kind of skipped over playing with Joy Kilsar. I played with this band called Joy Kilsar, and we toured a lot. I toured, that's some of the most touring I ever did, and toured internationally. We played on Prairie Home Companion, released 3 records that I was on.
And that was a band with the aforementioned Jake.
Yeah, Jake Jolliffe, Bridget Carney, who's the bass player for Lake Street Dive, Emma Beaton, and Matt Arcara, who is a Winfield champion.
Yeah.
And Emma is an amazing singer. So I toured with that band a lot. And that's like, I kind of like satiated my like classical banjo tooth with the Bee Eaters. And then I've also like always loved pop music. And Joy Kilsar was very pop influenced.
Yeah.
And then in the last like 3 years, I've been playing with Molly Tuttle.
Yeah.
Which has been super fun. And this banjo really opened up some cool stuff playing with Molly, because there's some sort of like, I don't know, Alison Krauss and Union Station type material, like slower stuff in particular, that like a lot of other bands would probably have somebody play dobro or something with more sustain, like or just have me play guitar. But Molly's always let me just play banjo. And, I think one thing that people like about playing with me is that I'm maybe a little more, I don't know, sensitive to what's going on, like in a global ensemble sense than some other players. So like playing really, really quiet, slow material is actually kind of my favorite thing to do on the banjo.
Interesting.
So getting to do that with Molly has been so fun, and this
that's
banjo,
where the sustain comes in.
It's so nice. Like you on this banjo and top tensions, kind of in general, like you can move your right hand like all the way up to basically to the neck, and it won't like wimp out. It'll just get fatter.
Wow. What other gear do you use?
Oh, right. Yeah, we were talking about... Sorry.
That's okay.
So with Molly, I've been playing through a 214C, which is the sort of cheaper version of a 414. It doesn't have any pattern selection. And I really like that microphone. I think for whatever reason, like for my right hand, like for my voice, it does what I really want a microphone to do. And amazingly enough, it's a large diaphragm microphone. It's never fed back.
Well, I was just going to ask if that actually works for most situations.
It's never fed. Like Molly's guitar mic is going to feed back like 10 times faster than this will. Wow, it's an interesting. I mean, I think it's a combination of that. It's transducerless, so it's super high output, and then.
It'd be transformerless.
Yeah,
I think
sorry. Sorry. I've already been teaching transformerless. So it's super high output. So it's really easy for sound guys to just crank it. Mm-hmm. And then it is way tighter, at least to my experience, than a typical large diaphragm would be.
Which mostly those can usually pick up an entire stage of people.
Totally. Yeah, but this is like feels like it's less than 90.
Okay.
Monitors are typically pretty quiet on stage with Molly too, which is helpful. I mean, I'm sure if I was like playing with a really loud band, it would be a nightmare.
Or drums or something.
Yeah, like yeah. But it's been amazing. Yeah, it's great. It has a really nice proximity boost when you get like really close. So playing the slow stuff that I was talking about, like if you put the banjo like I don't know, like
an inch or something,
2 inches from the diaphragm, or it's like it just gets huge.
Yeah, that would make sense from a ultra geeky standpoint. The more directional a microphone is, the more pronounced that proximity effect to be. So the fact that you think it's more focused actually makes sense with the fact that that it does accentuate those lower frequencies.
Yeah.
And we just lost everybody.
I've also
proximity effect, y'all. Look it up.
I also really like with shows with Simon. I've been using Audio Technica Pro 35 clip-on mic.
Yeah.
And I had been running it through a Headway preamp, which I've had for a long time, which is this English preamp company. Okay. But it finally died on me, and I'm actually live preamp less right now. I'm going to get a Felix sometime soon. Yep. I mean, that's sort of become the industry standard. I don't quite need one right now, so I've just been running that clip-on mic straight to the house, and they're pretty amazing. I mean, they typically we just leave it flat,
and that works.
Yeah,
and you don't miss anything by not being able to.
Not with
adjust
Simon.
Your dynamics in and out of the.
It wouldn't work with Molly, but with Simon, I mean, we are so like if you put just one microphone in front of us, it's pretty balanced. Like we've worked really hard on keeping the dynamics focused,
how to blend and stay out of each other's way.
Yeah. So like, it works just fine. And Simon, I mean, is like one of the most. You know what I really think of it? He's like one of the most generous musicians I've ever met in terms of like when you're playing with him, he just makes you sound better, So like playing with a microphone where like I can't step into something and get louder or step away and get softer. Playing with him, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
He's just listening, And
it sounds like you try to approach it the same way too.
For sure.
For sure. That's a good combination.
Yeah.
We haven't actually talked too much about actual playing. So for anyone unfamiliar with your playing style, do you have a way that you characterize it? I mean, to me, it's a very fluid mix of all of our standard styles that we know about, the Scruggs, the melodics, the single strings. I
mean, I think I have just been conscious of wanting to take all of those different ways of thinking about the banjo and just turning it into one voice. Mm-hmm. And, most recently, a lot of that has just been from like learning fiddle tunes, actually, and learning them in both octaves. And like doing them almost always in like blended single string and melodic style.
Is that what you find yourself practicing most often?
I mean, what I find myself practicing most often is the material that I have to learn.
Whatever the next day's gig
to be totally
requires.
honest. Yeah, I mean, people, like students ask me that, and I always struggle with like, do I give them the honest answer or do I give them the because like the reality is like I am on tour a lot, and then like I am typically doing other stuff when I'm not playing with Molly or Simon. If I'm home in Nashville, be doing a recording session or playing a gig and get the station in. And so I'm like constantly learning material.
And you play with a lot of, different combinations of people.
Right.
Which
Right.
always complicates. It's great, but it complicates things in another way.
Totally. But if I'm going to sit down and practice, I'll probably warm up with a metronome for a little while, sometimes just my right hand, like especially sort of evening out rhythmic disparities between switching between single string and roll bass stuff.
So how do you actually practice that? You'll play a roll and then go right into a single string pattern?
Just like keep the eighth notes going and make sure it's all really locked into the grid.
Interesting.
And then I might play some scales. Sorry, I wish I had I've never been one of those players that has I do this for 15 minutes and this for 15 minutes. I've never been that organized in any aspect of my life, except when someone's paying me to produce a record. But
when it counts.
Yeah, but and then learning something new is almost always the best catalyst for me to get excited about the instrument. Learning a new tune or transcribing a solo, even if I only make it through a lot of the time, I'll only make it through half the solo or something. Mm-hmm. And then I'll just get too excited about some new stuff that I've learned, and I'll figure out how to make it closed position, and then maybe cycle it through the circle of fourths or fifths, so I can play it in every key.
Wow.
So yeah, usually for me, it's these days when I'm practicing, I'm just looking for things to steal, and then incorporate into my own voice.
Almost everyone I've talked to has said some version of that.
Yeah.
When talking about their own style, about how it's just a grab bag of little snippets that you've learned everywhere.
Sure.
And have smuggled into people's ears by playing it yourself.
Yeah.
So maybe what you were just saying about, what did you just say? You learned a fiddle tune, then you learn it in a closed position, and then you cycle it through the fourths, and then you learn it single string. And
yeah, I mean, I usually, it's more like a lick, taking a lick and figuring out why it's functioning the way it is, and then using it on banjo in a bunch of different ways. And then, some of that stuff can also be used compositionally too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, let's see. So the first track off the new record with Simon, actually, you know what? No, I'll do this one called Ostrich Blues.
Okay.
That's super thematic kind of. So this tune just kind of poured out of the banjo after I had spent an afternoon playing along with Molly and balafon players on YouTube.
Okay.
And I actually played in between. I guess balafon. It's like a West African marimba, basically.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So wood keys that you hit with mallets.
Gotcha.
And I just have always really loved West African music. I actually sort of accidentally worked my way to the banjo, sort of tertiarily through learning West African percussion and then also some kora. In between.
You play some kora?
I don't anymore.
Wow.
I have one. I built one. Yeah.
How do you build a kora?
So the guy that ended up being my teacher, this guy named Jeff Bedoni, is actually one of the best kora builders in the world. Tumani Diabate plays one of his koras.
Yeah. Incredible.
So as a senior project, I convinced my school to let me build a kora with Jeff.
Wow. So you did it, and you still own it, and you actually know some.
It's been so long, but I that's definitely in there in my playing.
Wow.
That approach to rhythm is in there. I'm not saying I'm super deep on trad Malian music, but I spent a few years studying it and was really excited about it.
Have you ever transcribed any of that to banjo, or do you use any of?
The kora stuff is sort of impossible because the kora stuff is so much about having like a walking bass line and then a mid-range line and then improvising on top of that.
Yeah.
And it's kind of just not, it's like, I guess it's so frustrating on the banjo to try to do that I haven't really.
At least those melody lines at times seem possible. I don't.
Oh, the melody lines do. Yeah, I think it's like, but for me, I wish that it's like, if I'm going to play that, I would want to just play it on Cora.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like those sorts of things like soak into your playing, whether or not you're consciously adapting them to banjo or not.
I agree. They're in there.
So like, and
if they're in there, they'll come out.
Right. Like, like I would 100% say like if there's a workshop happening on like a trad, Molly and percussion or something where you live, like go to it. And don't worry about like trying to do it on the banjo. Just go to it and like have fun playing those instruments and like try to understand what's happening. And I guarantee it will like open something new on the banjo, whether or not you're being super purposeful about it or not.
Yeah. So for you, it opened up Ostrich Blues?
Ostrich Blues. Yeah, that's what it's called. And Simon takes this like just killing solo on this. But
so this is on the new record?
This is on the new record.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I have a secret lifelong dream, or I guess not even so secret, but I have a lifelong fantasy of playing banjo in like an Afro pop band. So
that'd be
anything
rad.
that has those influences it gets me for sure.
Yeah.
So everyone should have enjoyed that. If you want to hear the ripping hammered dulcimer solo, unfortunately we don't have Simon here, but you'll have to go check out the new recording. And I was actually listening to it on the way here.
Oh, nice.
And it's really cool. Definitely unlike anything I've heard. So any banjo fans, this is something new to listen to. How do people find out about you online? Yeah,
so I mean, I have a website. It's wescorbett.com. I also teach online and in person. All the info you need for that is on the website.
wescorbett.com.
Yep.
And they can find the Hammered Dulcimer album there.
Yes, they can. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Or all the usual places too, iTunes.
Yeah.
Apple Music.
The music places.
Yeah, the music places.
Google knows.
Yeah.
It can tell you. Okay. Hey, I really appreciate you taking the time, Wes.
Of course.
It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, thanks for
having me.
Good
luck for the rest of the weekend.
Thanks, man.
And that's all for this episode, folks. Thanks for listening to the conversation with Wes Corbett. You can email the show at pickyfingersbanjopodcast@gmail.com, Support the show at patreon.com/banjopodcast, or just by subscribing and rating and telling all your friends about it. That all helps a ton, and I really thank you for that. So this is Keith Billick, over and out. See you next time. Bye.